Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar on emergency response mock drills. We're glad you could join us. My name's James. I run webinars and events here at Triumvirate Environmental, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Before we get started and dive into our presentation today, I'd like to give you a brief overview on what the webinar is going to entail as we run through a few housekeeping items. You'll notice that everyone's microphones are muted, with the exception of myself and our speaker. We ask that if you were to get in your questions and any technical issues that come up, please use the questions box over on the right-hand side of your screen. That's how we're going to communicate today. Please get those in throughout the webinar, and we'll save the last 15 minutes or so to address questions. Any unanswered questions will be followed up on after the webinar in the coming days. So don't worry if we don't get to it today. We'll make sure we follow up with you in the next few days. Finally, this is an important point, probably our most popular question. We will send you the recording of today's webinar and the slide deck, and that'll be sent to you tomorrow morning in an email. Today's speaker is Kevin Coulon. Kevin is the Regional Services Director for Field Services and Industrial at Triumvirate Environmental's New England region. In this role, he manages the wastewater department, routine field service, decontamination, and on-site support. He also manages the emergency response program for all of New England. Kevin provides assessments of facilities from a regulatory standpoint and provides a detailed report of findings to help clients reach full environmental and safety compliance. And with that, I'll turn things over to Kevin. Hey, Kevin.
Thanks, James. So for today's topic, for mastering your emergency response drill, our key message is that a drill is a means of educating all parties involved in the appropriate response actions to be taken in the event of a true emergency. This, who needs to be educated, could certainly change drill to drill as to who are all the parties. Oftentimes a drill is looked at as a training exercise to train everybody involved in the actual spill. But what's often not fully looked at is educating those that may also be involved or be affected. So getting the message across that not only is it training, but it's educating everybody who's going to be involved or affected by the emergency response. So before we get started, just wanted to ask the question of how frequently do you conduct emergency response mock drills?
All right, and just launch that poll, so everybody should be able to see the options. They are quarterly, annually, once a long time ago, and never. And we'll share those results in a few seconds. All right, that's just about everybody. Let's go ahead and push that out. So Kevin, we've got 58% answered annually, 18% quarterly, 14% once a long time ago, and 10% never.
We have a good size differential between people that are doing it annually. Those of you that are, that's very great. Those that are doing it quarterly, hopefully you're taking each one and changing your scenario. And then people who may have done it might be worth looking at, and those who've never done it, hopefully this will help you set up how to do a mock drill at your facility. But just to start, I wanted to go over the agenda for today. We're going to cover who should be involved, identifying the scenario, how to complete a tabletop drill, and how to turn a tabletop drill into completing a live emergency drill. And then the big part to all of this is tying it together is the review of the drill. And at the very end, we'll open it up to questions if you have any in regards to the presentation, or if you have any that have come up at your facility that you may need a quick answer or some guidance on, please feel free to ask at the end. So the first part of who should be involved, oftentimes you'll think of the majority of people who should be, but sometimes when you go through the drill, you tend to find out the potential of people who have been left out or who should have been involved for that particular scenario you're going to be working on. So in thinking of who should be involved, there's definitely the four key players. There's your internal ER coordinators or your security, if you're a company that uses your security department as part of your coordination. Fire department, often involved. Police department isn't always involved, but they're definitely one that may need to be brought in, especially if you have public involved. And then your response provider. Some may say that there's 5 key people involved, with the 5th being the hospital, or sometimes the 5th being your EPA or your state, the EPA or your state DEP branch that you have may want to be involved. You may want to bring them in, and in some cases you may not want to bring them in. So you could do it without any regulators there. The big question is always, who else? Who else should I bring in? And the question to ask yourself is, who will be immediately affected by the spill, and who may feel the effects on their job from a spill that could occur? So if you're a lab facility, are your people in the lab going to be shut down? Or if you're a hospital facility, is it going to affect patients? If you're industrial, will it stop your production? Just looking through as to what areas you may need to shut down and who are actually going to be affected for that day. So after you decide who should potentially be involved, you need to look at identifying the scenario. And this doesn't mean you need to bring everybody in to identify the scenario. It is a very important step to make it a useful drill. However, you could do this with maybe a small group of people on what you want to educate and train people on. So to identify the scenario, you may want to look at worst case versus best case. Now, a lot of people go right to their worst case scenario, and that's a great thing to train on. But the question of why do best case? If you're at a facility where you don't have people that are buying into doing mock drills, or they don't really want to talk about emergency response, you don't get much buy-in, you may want to do a best case scenario, because a best case can show people how a good response will go. It'll help show some positives. In most cases, an ER is always looked at as a negative, so an emergency response is a negative. And if you have a struggle to get buy-in, a positive showing may help you get some people that want to jump in and be involved or want to give you some additional backing. The question of, do you want to do it as an internal emergency response or as a chemical into the environment? That's going to help you determine which parties are involved. The type of release may put you into, will there be reporting required? Will there be DEP involved? And then is there going to be any public involvement? Now, public could be visitors. They're not an employee of your facility. Somebody brought people in, or you're having a tour of your facility, and usually it's in those cases that you have a spill comes in or something happens you weren't expecting. Could also be pedestrians. What if you are in a busy city and you have to put everybody outside and you're going to have onlookers or people walking by and asking multiple questions? How are you going to deal with the public? Once you've identified how you want to go about this, worst case or best case, internal, external, and type of release, you can then really identify the particular scenario that you want to focus in on. So for today, we've identified the scenario that is often one, it's not one that happens all too often, but when it does happen, there are multiple people that are involved that usually aren't part of your emergency response program. So in the scenario we're going to walk through today, an employee calls in stating that a 30-gallon drum of flammable material ruptured and went down the floor drain. In your facility, the floor drain is attached to a wastewater system that has active discharge. And you currently have a discharge permit that does not cover flammable materials. So when you get to this, it's what do you do next? You've identified what it is, and in this case, 30-gallon of flammable, not everybody's going to have it. But if you're at a facility that has a discharge permit and let's say a gallon goes down and it doesn't meet your discharge permit, you could be in the same scenario. In this case, we're going to use a 30-gallon drum. This was a live emergency response. We went through couple years back, and part of that emergency response is what we've provided in this setting up the scenario. So now that you have your scenario, you've given it to everybody, you then want to go to set up your tabletop drill and complete a tabletop drill. You want to develop some of your steps that you're going to give to people, or you could just give the timeline of what happened. Somebody called it in, we had a spill of flammable material, it went down to the tank, we can't discharge it, and then you just ask the group what next. And you can leave it open to see what they're going to come up with. What steps do they think? And then you're more of a guide. As they come up with ideas, you help people build off the ideas and take notes. So when you complete the tabletop drill, the tabletop starts with the scenario and the steps taken by you in response to the spill notification. So in this case, you want to look at who's going to be your main contact. Will you be the main contact? In some cases, we've done these with facilities where they had a secondary or a tertiary contact in the event of a spill, where they actually wanted to test the secondary or tertiary, and that primary person actually left site and went off site for lunch and played the scenario that they weren't there, and then would come in as it was going just to help oversee and monitor what was going on. You want to know who will notify employees to limit discharge. Is there a way that you can shut down your drain discharge? That's going to affect a lot of people. If you are a large facility and it all runs into this one wastewater tank, are you going to shut down your manufacturing? You're going to shut down your research? So it's something that you really need to take into account. And maybe there's one group within your facility that can't stop, but by limiting everybody else, you produce limited flow into the tanks. Who will notify your operator? If you're a facility that requires an operator for that wastewater system, who's going to go notify them? Did you even think to bring them to the tabletop drill? If you haven't, they're one that you may want to bring in so they can talk through their steps as to what they can do to limit the discharge. Who will you need outside help, and will you call? Are you going to need a responder? Are you going to need extra storage? And then will you need to evacuate the room? You may have to evacuate the wastewater room that you have your tanks in, because there could be atmosphere. The atmosphere could have changed once you have the flammable material. And then also the area that it was spilled, is there still evidence of the spill in that particular room? So going through those steps as to what you're going to do. Will you evacuate the room? And then what will you do with the people? Will you evacuate the wastewater room? And how you limit entrance into that area? What is going to be your trigger point to when you need outside help? After you've identified your steps, you then want to gain estimated response time for each party and what they'll cover. So is it going to be an outside vendor that's coming in to help you? When they come in, who's going to be their main contact? You want to know who you'll be talking to from that group, and you also want to give them the name and number of the particular person they're going to contact when they arrive on site. You want to make sure that they can get a hold of somebody right away and get to the spill and help you solve the issue. You then want to know what their role will be when they show up. That role may change depending on who else you called in. If the fire department's on site, they're going to take the lead. In some cases, they take the lead until a hazmat responder shows up and they turn it over. If you have a DEP that shows up, they may want to oversee it the entire time, or you may choose to be the incident commander for the entire spill and everybody reports up to you. You also want to know what level of response the company is going to do when they show up. And this is something that you're going to talk through during your tabletop. Everybody who's in the room is going to talk to the level of their response and what they're going to do. And for the response company coming in, if you bring in outside help, you'd want to know if they're just going to remove the hazard. Are they going to do a full decon? Are they going to do decon and dispose of the material at that particular day? Are they going to need to do any sampling? Are they going to have to enter the tank? Are you going to need your tank cleaned? And are they aware that they need to come prepared to do a confined space entry? And are they going to clean up the spill area in the room where it's spilled? And will you also want them to flush the drains? Are you afraid that there may be some flammable material still in the drains from where it's spilled to the tank? Are you going to want them to flush it? And do you need a tanker there to get that excess material that's coming down? And then also ask, do they have any questions? What questions do they have for you? What questions do they have for the fire department? This is a time when you're sitting down for the tabletop to have each group talk to each other and figure out what will you cover and what will the other group cover or what won't they cover. That'll help you decide if you need any additional support from maybe another vendor to come in. When you complete the tabletop for everybody there, you want to have a copy of your emergency action plan or your contingency plan at the meeting for reference. It's in your best interest to get it to everybody before they show up to the drill. That way they can read through it and they can be familiar with it and also have some questions if they have any questions when reading through it that you can identify right away. A key portion to doing the tabletop is assign a note taker to write down all questions, do a timeline of everything that people walk through, and then comments on the response program. This is going to help you outline how you go into either updating your plan or setting up your actual emergency response drill, so putting it into live action. And then be detailed in your response for the tabletop. Will you stop water usage to the tank? Be very clear on maybe there is a lab that can't shut down. So if you did a pre-walkthrough to your area, is there any facility that you can't go in and shut down? They need to stay operational. So if their flow is 100 gallons an hour, you need to make sure that you have that amount of run. Well, you need to notify your downstream outlet. Is your permit or your discharge permit, was that given to you by a water authority in your facility, in your state, or was it given to you by a POTW? And if you're under a publicly owned treatment work permit, or any permit is going to have limitations as to what you can discharge. Now, if you feel some has already been discharged out and you've shut off the rest, you may want to notify your POTW so they can prepare for what's coming downstream. Are you going to take any preventative measures? Are you going to call in for a tanker? Are you going to call in for portable totes or a frac tank? If you have small capacity for those tanks but you can't shut down your production, how are you going to continue? Can you pump everything that's inside that tank into portable totes, a tanker, or a frac tank to do analytical and then set up disposal? And then will you need additional water storage, again, to the tankers and the totes and frac tanks? Another part of the preventative measures, is there any way to shut down your discharge? Can you ensure that nothing gets out? Does your effluent have a shutoff valve in the piping before it discharges to sewer? When you do go into the tanker and the totes and the frac tanks, you want to cover who's going to provide them. Are you responsible for providing them, or is that going to be your emergency response provider? For when you get into the larger frac tanks, are you going to have a contract with a company that provides only that material, or does your response company also carry those? So once you've done your post-tabletop, you've gone around, everybody's given you their answers on what they're going to do, what they're going to cover. You want to send out a recap to all the attendees. So your note taker is going to have notes as to what each company will do, whether it's a fire department, if you had a hazardous waste company on site for the response, what they're going to do, what your internal people are going to do. If you brought in a wastewater operator, what they're going to do. You may want to look at the labs that might be affected, and do you bring in a representative? Or if it's manufacturing, could you bring in somebody from manufacturing to represent them as to what they can do to help with this scenario? If there was anything brought up as recommendations, can you update any internal programs based on those? And from that, that may either make a better contingency plan, emergency action plan, and it can help set up for your live emergency drill where you put those recommendations into play. And then you want to plan for your live emergency drill. When you have completed the spill, all verbal from each group should definitely be in the recap. So going back to the note taker and the recap, make sure that it's all in there. The more detailed the notes, the better you are for lining up your live drill and making it more of an educational experience. You also, in your recap, if any to-dos were talked about. So if you need a contract, or you need a write-up from your emergency response company, or you need some information from the fire department that was talked about in there, or the fire department needs information from you, identify all those to-dos and put time frames as to when you expect to see those from people or when you expect to get things out to the people that requested them. So you've sent everything out to everybody. Your next step is to complete a live emergency drill. So you've done your tabletop, you've worked through it, but now how do you put it into place so people can actually see it in action? So taking someone's verbal and actually putting in to see what they can do. The live emergency response is set up very, very similar. You're going to set the stage again. We're going to use the same spill as we talked about before, the flammables going down the drain. You'd want to inform the parties that a drill is going to be happening. You'd want to put the drill in motion. And you should assign someone to just take notes. Now, when you take notes, this could be somebody internal, or you could look at a third-party person, an unbiased person, to come in and take notes of the entire spill response for the mock drill. When you identify the setting, are you a lab facility? Are you a storage facility? Are you a manufacturing facility? Is it on your manufacturing floor? Are you a hospital? We did talk about if the flammable doesn't fit into your scenario. There are hospitals that have emergency response trauma units where they bring people in to wash them down, that all that material goes into a tank. And what's the holding capacity for that tank? So if you're a hospital, that's a potential way you can identify this scenario. There's also the use of a safe disposal die. If you want to give the full visual effect, if you're a facility that has clear wastewater tanks, there are tracing dies that you can put down piping that are safe to go down the drain, but it's going to turn that tank either yellow or red or green, and you could show that it all mixes in and it's in the tank, and how do you stop it from getting out? And then, will you stop the use of drains? This could give the true effect to the users that you have in your facility. So not the emergency response personnel that you have in your own facility, but it's the people working on the plant floor, it's the people working in labs or in emergency rooms or in the storage areas, those people that are using the drains that actually go to that wastewater system. Now, when you shut these down, bathrooms don't go to these wastewater systems. So that's one thing that you may want to let people know, that a bathroom can still be used, but it's the lab sinks, it's the floor drains that go into the wastewater systems. And that may be a question that comes up, can I still use a restroom facility? And that's something that you want to be prepared for. Like I said before, informing parties of the drill, you don't necessarily have to give them the exact date and time of when it's going to happen. If you're going to require a good amount of people to be out there to help do the education, then you want to bring in your outside vendors and talk about a particular date and ask how many people they can send out there. If they're a service company that is going to be using their resources to service potential other customers they have, you want to make sure that they have in their schedule to have the correct amount of people to be on site at your facility to run through this drill. The type of drill, again, not needed, but if you want to educate your staff as to what outside vendors will do when they come in, you want to let them know what they're going to be responding to, so all the correct equipment is to come out. You may not want to bring a frac tank just to do an ER mock drill, but maybe you bring a tote just to show someone what a tote would look like if you got to put water into the tote from the tank. Are they going to run a submersible pump into that tote? Just to give people a feel of what would actually happen. And then identify the parties you're going to call. Everybody you've brought into the tabletop will most likely be part of your emergency response mock drill. Will it be the fire department, the police department, the hospital? Is the POTW going to be involved? Is your local DEP going to be involved? And is your emergency response provider going to be involved? Again, will it be people from outside of your internal that are going to be involved, like a lab manager, a manufacturing plant manager, or a wastewater operator? Are they going to be involved in this scenario? So you put the drill in motion. Live spill is called in within your company. You may want to work with somebody in that area to discharge water with trace dye. Now, you don't have to do the full 30 gallons. You could do a gallon with enough just to show the liquid that shows up in the wastewater tank. Again, it needs to be a safe liquid that can be discharged per your permit. You're assigning someone to call for help and take attendance. Now, you take attendance if evacuation is required. So if you're evacuating a particular area, you want to have attendance for everybody in that particular area. Earlier, when we talked about setting the stage for the tabletop, we talked about, will the public be involved, and also mentioned visitors. What happens if the area that the spill occurred in is going to have visitors? Who's going to take attendance for all the visitors? Do you have a visitor log? Do they have visitor passes, and are they with somebody that's going to be escorting them the whole time? So figuring that out may be something that you overlooked in your tabletop, and now you have to take care of it in your mock drill. When you take the notes and the observer for the emergency response in the public, this is a very important part for putting the mock drill in place. People are going to learn and be educated as to the steps that were taken, but everybody doesn't see each part that's going on. And that note taker, it may actually be a team of note takers where you give one note taker for the fire department, one for internal, one for external response companies that come in. That they would all come together, compile the notes, and if you don't want it to be an internal, maybe you bring a third party in. Or maybe you ask each group to have their own note taker where the hazmat responder may take notes on the fire department. Fire department takes notes on the external response provider, and vice versa. Or they're going to take notes on your group that's doing their response. It helps to produce an unbiased note-taking and the ability to give some constructive criticism on what may or may not have taken part during the spill response. The timing of the responses is going to be everything. How long for each party to respond? Is it, if you need a tanker to respond, is it going to be quicker to have them bring totes? Bring a tote while you wait for the tanker. I can remember at one point getting an emergency response call to check, see if we could do this, and if we had totes and tankers on standby. When we went through this role with someone else, that was a question. If you can't get a tanker here in half hour, can you get totes here in 15 minutes? Something along those lines. How quickly do you need the equipment on site? And timer. You want to have the tank to fill time. So with the amount of discharge that's going in, how quickly will that tank fill versus response time? And it may be something where you need to look at, should an emergency tote be stationed at your facility? Do you want to go to that extreme with a preventative measure? How long to evacuate the area? If you do need to evacuate the area, how long did it take to get everybody out, and how long did it take to take attendance of everybody? And also, was public involved in regards to visitors? How long did it take to get a full account of all your visitors? And then how long to protect the environment? If something does go down the drain that can't be discharged, how quickly can you shut off discharge at your effluent pipe? How quickly can you pump off some of that material? What other steps could you take to potentially protect the environment? Does it go to a catch basin first outside of your facility, or does it go direct to a sewer? Those are some things to think about and how quickly you can protect those areas. The quickest one that we've seen in doing these types of spills is actually having a shutoff valve and being able to shut off how your tanks can discharge to the sewer. Now, if you can go in and you can shut this down, you just want to make sure that you're not going to back up into your facility and create another problem. So that is something that you need to take into account at the time of response and if you have additional storage on site. When you go through everything with everybody, you do have all your note takers. Those note takers are then going to play a key role in reviewing your drill. They're going to take you from the start of the drill all the way to the end of the drill. You invite all your parties back. This is very similar to a tabletop. You're bringing everybody down. You're going to sit down. You've sat with all of your note takers prior to this, and you've compiled all notes to go through a step-by-step, go through the pros and the cons of what happened. You're reviewing all of your observations with each group. Make sure that you do want to identify some positives, and you also want to identify constructive criticism. This is a means to educate people, educate everybody that's involved in the spill or in the response, and also help to improve not only your program, but maybe you can improve the fire department's program or improve the hazardous responders program that they have. Maybe the program that they have doesn't particularly work for your facility and they always need to come with extra supplies, or maybe you need drain covers, or maybe you're always going to need a submersible pump when they show up. That's something that you want to talk through as to what you want to expect to get from them when they show up on your site. You also want to talk about changes that are going to happen to your program. When you're going through this review, it may spark some questions from outside vendors or internal people about the notes. Maybe there was something observed in the mock drill that isn't covered in your contingency plan or your emergency action plan. And how can you convert that into something that will fit into your emergency action plan? Is it something that's needed in your plan? Or were the steps taken that were missed in your plan? If there's a note in there where somebody overlooked it, was there not the right parties involved? Did you forget to include somebody? Once you've made any changes, if you need to, or if outside vendors need to have changes done to their program, you want to make sure that there's a retraining. And you want to retrain as needed. You may not need to retrain people on the entire emergency action plan or the contingency plan, but you need to retrain people onto what was lacking. Also, if your outside response provider comes in and they need additional training for your facility, maybe you do a training for their entire group that's going to come out. I know we do this with a few of our customers that come in that we do emergency response. They've actually come to our facility, or we develop a group that's particular for their facility where they go through an annual training and an annual refresher of what's changed at their facility, or in regards to if there's a new process that comes online. Going through this scenario type of creating a tabletop, creating a mock drill, and going through your entire scenario in both cases, what if you start a new process in your facility? Or you're going to be opening a new production in your facility that's using chemicals you've never used before, or it's going to have a different type of machinery that's going to be used on site that could have high potential for a spill. Then maybe you set up a drill around that and you re-educate everybody just on that particular scenario. Just a couple ideas that may come up as you have, as businesses change, processes change, and things to think about as people may be coming to you if you're the EHS or facilities department for your your own facility, these are questions you may get asked. And again, just going back to what the key message is for an emergency response mock drill and tabletop, these drills are means of educating, not just training, of all parties involved in the appropriate response actions to be taken in the event of a true emergency. And again, by educating, it may not be the people responding. You may be educating those that are going to be kind of in the outside circle looking in, so they understand what's going on or what would happen in the event of a spill. What might be affected by their day? Will their research get stopped for a little while? Will manufacturing be stopped for a little while? Or what could they do while that portion of their business is shut down for an hour or 2 hours? Is there other work they could do? Or is there anything that they could do on their end that they learned to help with this scenario? So in summary, there are a lot of different scenarios that could always be out there. This particular scenario is one that we've seen where we've seen it with dichloromethane that's gone down the drain. That was actually a particular facility that went through a limestone chip tank. We've seen flammable material that's gone into a wastewater tank. Then we've also seen where a facility actually didn't have any type of pretreatment system, where flammables went down the drain accidentally and it was going towards a POTW. This type of scenario isn't something that happens all the time, but it does happen out there. And now you have other parties that you may not think about, and that would go into your discharge permit, or if you have a wastewater treatment permit, or if you have an agreement with the POTW, or if it's your permits through your state. Knowing more about those permits that are sometimes not fully looked at in the day-to-day EHS world, where it's a lot around the safety of your workers. This drill goes a little bit more into the safety of the environment and how you can protect that. And there's, like I said, there's many other scenarios that are out there. The last one we did was a spill of oil to the environment. So they do change, and it also changes who you need for each particular spill. So it is a lot of information, and I would like to open it up for questions if anybody has any on the content that we talked about, or if anybody has any questions on their particular facility that a scenario may come up that you have some particular questions on.
Thank you, Kevin. And we will at this time kind of switch gears here into the Q&A portion of today's webinar. I did see a couple questions come in, and I encourage those of you who may have a question for Kevin, we still have plenty of time left to go ahead and type that in. And I'll give you a minute to do that. Before we get to those, I'd like to advance here to the last slide and share some contact information and information on what you can expect after today's webinar. As I mentioned at the top, you will receive a copy of the presentation and the recording if you want to listen back to it at your convenience. You'll also receive a link to a short survey. We'd greatly appreciate your feedback on the webinar and any ideas you have for improvement or for topics in the future. And as a thank you for attending, Triumvirate Environmental is offering to help you prepare for your next ER mock drill with a complimentary consultation. And to learn more about that, I'm going to shoot over a link in the chat tool and just take a look. And if you're interested, you can submit the short form. In addition, you'll find Kevin's contact information if you have any questions for him after absorbing all the information from today's event. You can give him a call or send him an email. And you can also visit our website for more content and resources. So I think that's all I had as far as the follow-up. Let's jump into those questions, and I hope we've got a bunch of good ones there. The first one is a comment that I wanted to share. This one's from Andy. He just said, great point about best case scenarios. Little wins can help build momentum and buy-in for the worst case scenarios. So Kevin, that was a point you made earlier, and I thought that was a good one to share.
Thanks, Gary. That is one that we've actually seen success at some other facilities where the EHS or facilities department was not getting buy-in from all the departments that would be involved until they showed a positive one on how they would take their full efforts to prevent loss of time, the loss of manufacturing. So it does go a long way if you can show that best case scenario every now and then to people when it comes to an emergency response.
Great. So yeah, thanks for that comment. Please keep sending them in. Kevin, our first question, how long do you typically wait between running the tabletop drill and the live drill?
It can really depend on what you're actually going to be doing the drill on and how much particular setup you're going to need. If you'll be using a lot of outside resources, maybe it be the fire department or your emergency response company, you're going to run into some issues with their scheduling to get them on site. It is good to keep it within 2 to 4 weeks from when you did the tabletop, so it's still fresh in people's minds. Once you get past that 4-week and you're into the second and third month, you're going to have some people that have maybe forgot some things in the tabletop, which means having to do a quick refresher of the tabletop before jumping into the scenario. But a quick turnaround, 2 to 4 weeks, is what I would say is best case scenario to do the live drill after your tabletop.
Great. I think that gives everyone a good benchmark. Thanks for that, Kevin. Another timing question. Jack wants to know, how long does a live emergency drill take typically?
Again, that can vary. We've done one with one company that lasted an hour, and really all that they wanted to show was people coming on site, very minimal. And then we've done ones that are full 8 hours, where you show up its entire day, and it's start to finish. And it was actually going through and using cleanup material and producing drums. In these cases, it was just using water, so you're really not creating a waste, but you were giving people the visual, and you were going through live time frames of, we're going to call you, make sure you leave from your facility so we can see the full time frame. But that comes down to how much exposure you want to give. Some people are afraid to get too much exposure. Some people want to be fully transparent. But they can vary. I think a good one for timing is anywhere from 2 to 3 hours, so you can see full setup, all the way from showing up to closure and recap.
Great, thanks. And a follow-up from Jack. In your experience, do the local responders have the time to spend for these mock drills?
In some towns, yes. If you do reach out to them, there are some of the larger towns that actually have a hazmat group within their fire department. In November of 2016, actually went down and did a mock drill with the DC hazmat division, and they were more than willing to come out because they wanted to actually test their own guys and use their equipment, because when they have the hazmat company, the hazmat division within their particular fire department, they may not get used that often, and they may want to use it as a refresher for themselves to go through and get all of their equipment on. But there are some that don't want to show up, and that won't give you the help. And sometimes that is the police department.
Yeah, but that's a great point that you made. It could be used, or an opportunity for, a rehearsal for everybody involved, not just the company that had the spill. So good. We've got another question here, and it states, in your opinion, Kevin, is it better to focus on scenarios most likely to be encountered despite potential redundancy, or possible worst-case events that seem least likely to occur?
In some scenarios, you may, if you're a facility that does them quarterly, you're not going to want to do worst case every single time. But you could start to focus on smaller drills that build up into the worst case scenario. I do think that you should throw a positive one in there to show best case. At least once a year, or if you want to do it every other year, you do the very worst case scenario, just so everybody can see it. Those companies that may be doing it quarterly are doing quick, not exactly best case scenario, but they're just going through the motions so it stays fresh in everybody's mind. I would recommend definitely not doing worst case every single time, but doing one that can be educational to everybody. So you want to make sure people will get something out of it.
And I've got a few questions here from Rick, and I'll start with the first one. How do you handle people that have been taken to a hospital? What if an evacuation ends up being hours? What do you do about food, temperature, weather, things like that?
That's something that you're always going to have to take into account, and you'd want to cover that in your tabletop. So if it is going to be, let's say you're planning to do one in December and you need to put people outside, you may want to reach out to any potential neighboring companies that you have to see if they could be kind of a safe haven to put people in, so they're not exposed to the cold weather. Another issue could be rain that comes up. When it comes to somebody going to the hospital, if you're going to do a scenario that involves somebody that's been injured, you'd want to have somebody that's assigned to that person while they're on site, and it would be a company decision whether you send someone with them to the hospital. We just ran through a scenario like this for another company where they wanted to send someone to the hospital, and they actually sent someone from their particular department to stay with them, but assign someone from their EHS department to be the liaison from the ambulance company showing up to the person on site and making sure that they're okay and do the transition to the ambulatory. If it's something to do where you're doing it in July or August, you may want to talk about in your tabletop, are you going to need tents? Are you going to need a water station? What happens if you need bathrooms? Do you have a neighboring facility that will let you utilize the bathrooms? Or is it something that you're going to need to get portable restrooms? Are they going to be a vendor that you have on call if it's a long-term evacuation? Those are things that you do need to think about when you go into these scenarios, and that is something you'd work out through your tabletop depending on the scenario.
Awesome, and thanks for expanding on that, and I hope that answers Rick's questions. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I have 2 more questions to go, so we should finish up a little bit early. Kevin, should you use the same training for fires and spills?
Fires and spills are going to be a little bit different. As you go into, we did mention emergency action plan, and your emergency action plan is going to cover everything. Could you use the same mentality when you're doing attendance and you're evacuating people and you're doing the timing? We all go through fire drills. We all have fire department will show up. They'll run the fire alarm. I can remember growing up going through elementary and junior high and high school where they time everybody to see how quickly you get out. And as we've all gotten older into working at companies, you see the same thing where how quickly can you get people out from a fire? In regards to chemical, your chemical is going to be specific to that area, but you're also running into other hazards. You could have respiratory hazards. You could have contact with skin. Did it get into the ventilation system? So there are some similarities, but there are differences in regards to doing a fire drill compared to a potential chemical spill drill. So they do need to be handled a little bit different, but similarities.
Got it. Thanks for clarifying that one, Kevin. Our last question for the day, I didn't see any new ones come in, so we'll finish here. Reverting back to the scenario you walked us through, in that scenario, what would be the issue with just discharging the liquid?
There could be multiple issues in discharging the liquid that went down to the tank. The first issue could be your local POTW. Can they actually take that material in? The second issue could be, does it fit into your permit and can your tank handle that material? Another issue could be, what's the material going down? Is it, I mean, now it's a waste. It's been spilled. It's going down the drain. You have a spilled waste. Is it a listed material? Is it a characteristic material? And now you're going into really your haz waste determination. If it's a listed material, you're now running into discharging of a hazardous waste, and you could run into your local DEP issues. So there are some questions you need to go through, and you may need to get an emergency okay for discharge. Will your POTW let you do it? They may say, no, you can't put it down the drain. It could also be that it doesn't fit into your permit. So the chemicals that are going in, now let's say you're using a sulfuric acid solution or sodium hydroxide solution, and that's going in to treat it, but the material that went down reacts with sulfuric or reacts with sodium hydroxide or sodium bicarbonate. There's a lot of things that need to go into that decision as to whether you can discharge. And you need to make sure that you can check off everything to make sure, one, it's safe to do so, two, the legal side of it from the environmental regulations, and then the legal side to it, to your agreement with your POTW for downstream. Who else is it going to affect? So there are a lot of questions you need to ask yourself before that goes through.
Thanks, Kevin. That'll do it for the questions. I want to thank everybody for attending today, for your participation, for sending in questions. We'd like to continue the conversation, so feel free to reach out to Kevin or to Triumvirate, and keep attending our webinars. We'll be holding another 2 more in February on the new hazardous waste generator improvements rule, and one on lab safety. So be sure to keep an eye out for that. And before we close down, Kevin, anything else to add?
Like that, if anybody has any additional questions that do come up, please feel free to ask. This scenario is a little unique. It doesn't happen all the time, but it is one that comes up, and it's often these scenarios that aren't always thought about that are usually the most pressing on people when they do happen and tough to get through. So if you come up with anything else, please feel free to ask, and I do hope that this was helpful for everyone.
Yep, and Kevin and I were talking, we'll probably keep running and refreshing this webinar with a new scenario for next time. So let us know if you have any suggestions. All right, that'll do it for today. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.